Hi painters, we are here to talk about the effects of light on color and temperature. So right now I have this piece of white paper in front of us to look at how different lights will change the way that we perceive the white. And the reason I'm putting white out first is because white is, as an additive colors idea, reflects back the entire spectrum of the rainbow. So your color wheel colors are all coming forward, adding together as a light form and forming white, as opposed to subtractive color when we're mixing all the colors together and neutralizing them and making black. So we're starting with how light reflects off of white because it's a bit dramatic, and to inform you about how that will change the way that you perceive color when just looking around and also when painting for sure. So right now we're in daylight and it's actually kind of a cloudy day in my studio. I have daylight coming from overhead skylights and from the north. So this is what it looks like on my table today. And to show you in contrast, I will turn on some light bulbs and we'll see what those look like. All right, so this bulb that I'm going to turn on is a full spectrum bulb. They call it a full spectrum bulb. And you see how what it ends up doing is really making the warm tones more come forward. You can see even what it does to my hand. It's warm in an orangey red way, and so it's changed the way that we perceive that pure white. But it's also, the more you look at it, going to start to shift and have some of the blue tones come forward, some of the green tones come forward, and it's attempting to color balance the white. So that's this particular bulb. It's again, supposed to emulate daylight. So I'm going to turn that off. And I'll show you the light that I've been using to film under, which again, in contrast to the other light, shows a much bluer / cooler, which we're going to talk about, light. And so this is the light that I prefer to demonstrate color under, because to me it emulates daylight much more realistically than the one that's supposed to emulate daylight. The lights that you might be using at nighttime, if you do not have decent bulbs, are often fluorescent or LED lights, and those are going to give very different types of color light too. Most painters prefer to have some consistency with the light that they are going to paint under and the light that the painting will be seen in. That is not always possible, and it's been a difficulty for me. So I will just say that don't be surprised if you're painting at night and then you go outside the next day with your painting to photograph it and it looks completely different. There are many ways to try and control that. I just, for the most part, want to point out to you what light does when reflecting off of white and how much it changes our perception of that color. So I'm going to, again, sort of just demonstrate the way that the daylight looks in contrast with the light that I had on, and start to look at some color under these lights. So a couple of things here. This is orange, and we're going to be dealing with blue and orange in this next project. And so looking at this orange on the white page, we might start to see, if you stare for long enough, that the white around the orange might start to feel even cooler because of that complementary contrast, what we call simultaneous contrast, which is that because our eye is looking at the orange, it's seeking out blue somewhere else. The complementary colors do that thing when our eye looks at them next to each other, is they make them stronger looking, and that's because our eye is vibrating between the two of them, and feel complete because they're next to each other. Our eye is bouncing back and forth at the same rate. Whereas when the blue is gone, when the complement is gone, the eye is seeking that blue. So I do always think about complementary colors a little bit like relationships. Like if this was your best friend and you feel really complete and happy when they're next to each other, and then when the best friend's gone, and then, you know, there you go. So that's my big metaphor. So we're noticing the way that this looks in this light, right? Maybe we're seeing this a little cooler if you're staring at it for long enough. And then I'll go ahead and turn on the light that I work under for these demos. And you might see that it's brighter and it's more consistent all the way through, but also that it has changed the quality of the orange and maybe has made at first this white to feel a little bit warmer again than it was. The more we stare at it though, and you let that optical effect happen, oftentimes you'll start to see again the blue come forward from that effect. So notice how different light and shifting light throughout the day changes things. And we'll just kind of look at the blue on white as well and kind of see if things start to feel slightly warmer in this orange than at first. And at first it might seem more cool when you put something down that's cool. And the more you stare at it, the eye will start to seek out that orange and some warmth will come through. And that's a subtlety that we'll look for. And I'll just turn off this light again to reiterate how differently these things go. And your eye might be just going back to seeing this as much warmer suddenly. So notice all of the changes in the way that staring and looking and light change perception. We will be dealing also with neutrals, and you might remember this sort of brown piece of paper from the last example exercise that we did, and it's not exactly a neutral, but it is a color that you don't say is orange or blue or black or white or anything. It's a neutral. It's on top of this paper, perhaps reading more toward the orange than toward the blue if we were to use those two colors to mix it. It perhaps, if you stare at it long enough, will make the surrounding white start to feel slightly bluer. And let's look and see how the light shifts our perception of that. So the perception of the orange neutral has kind of shifted and seems to have more depth, for one thing, at least for my eye and through in life. And also, again, that warmth that first comes up on the paper now starts to feel cooler in response to this. So we can then determine that this neutral is also sort of more toward orange than toward blue, if that's the effect it's having on the surrounding white. So I wanted to just kind of quickly go through how these lights can affect other colors, including black. So here's that black paper you dealt with in the red-green palette, and we're seeing how it looks in this particular light, and I'm going to turn off the light and we'll see how it shifts. All right, so we're seeing it turning from, you know, your perception may be different than mine, and definitely the camera, I will say, looks quite different than in real life, but the effect of the blue light coming from overhead, the natural daylight, which is a bluer light, is giving it a cool cast, and when we turn on the light, it gives it definitely a slight warmer cast. But the more we stare at it, and again, with color relativity, if we put the orange on top of that, it's going to be perceived in one way, and it's going to shift the way we see that neutral. And if we put blue on there, it's going to definitely shift the way that we see the neutral. So color context really will change the surrounding of any color that we're perceiving. So again, we see our blue in the light bulb light. And when we turn it off, we see how that blue, and that seems quite dramatic, the blue on the blue really picking up the blueness, and then noticing when we put the light on how it diffuses that blue because it's adding a warmth. Okay. And the orange in what we're perceiving as a warmer light right now. And we'll turn that off, and we'll see how the blueness of the light, the coolness of the natural daylight diffuses that orange. Okay. These colors are colors that you'll work with in your still life, so you want to think about how you place them, what kind of light you're dealing with, just so you're aware of that. And you will want to think about the quantity of each of the colors. So, you know, thinking about how different it is if you have just a little bit of white versus a lot of white in quantity of your colors. I'm going to also have you deal with other elements in your still life, but these will just sort of be solid colors that will carry you through from project to project that you're trying to interpret. So that is light and color, and we'll move along to our palette and how it relates to certain objects in nature. All right.